My husband is in love with his student. I have no idea what to do. My name is Emily, and from the outside, our lives probably looked like a neatly laid out sequence of ideal milestones. But sometimes, what you see on the surface doesn't quite tell the whole story underneath. My husband, Michael, and I met during our sophomore year at the University of Michigan. We were both pursuing degrees that promised intense careers, mine in architectural design and his in medicine. Our paths crossed in an elective class, History of Modern Europe, a subject far removed from our major fields, perhaps explaining why we noticed each other among the crowd of future doctors and architects. Our meeting was as mundane as it was fateful. A spilled coffee, a stack of medical textbooks teetering precariously. I reached out to help, and our stories entwined from that moment. He apologized for the mess, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the frantic rush of the cafeteria. We talked briefly about our courses, laughed at the serendipity of our majors colliding, and exchanged numbers. That brief encounter grew into long nights spent discussing everything from Renaissance literature to the intricacies of human anatomy. In him, I found a listening ear and a thoughtful heart. In me, he found a burst of creativity and warmth. From the start, Michael was the kind of man who drew people in effortlessly. His charisma wasn't the flashy kind that fades after a few encounters. It was a gentle, enduring magnetism coupled with a brilliant mind that fascinated me endlessly. I remember how during our study sessions, he'd relate historical events to human behaviors with such passion that even the driest facts seemed to breathe and live. We fell in love among books and coffee spills, our conversations stretching late into the night, often closing the library down. By the time we graduated, there was no question that we would marry. We were married 2 years after my graduation in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by family and friends. It was simple, beautiful, just like we wanted. Our lives together felt like a constant adventure, from our small apartment filled with mismatched furniture to our discussions about future dreams and aspirations. Fast forward 8 years, we were celebrating our daughter, Sophie's, birthday. Born in the early uncertain days of 2020, she was a light in a time of global upheaval. Michael had by then become a respected professor at a medical school, adored by his students for the same reasons he had once captivated me. His career had flourished in the ways we had imagined, and he carried his responsibilities with an admirable balance of seriousness and empathy. Michael's career as a professor at the local med school was a source of pride for us both. He loved teaching, loved the spark in his students' eyes when complex concepts finally made sense. I watched him over the years, growing into a role that seemed tailor-made for him, mentor, educator, and occasionally, friend to his students. He was a doctor himself, a fact that filled our conversations with fascinating, if sometimes gruesome, stories from the hospital. His dedication was as clear as the exhaustion that would sometimes shadow his features after a long day. For my part, I had put a pause on my own career to focus on raising Sophie, a decision that felt right despite the shadow it cast on my professional ambitions. It was a life that I never really questioned. The normalcy of it was comforting in its own way. My days revolved around playdates and parent-teacher meetings, interspersed with freelance design projects when time allowed. Michael and we were a team, or so I believed, navigating the challenges of parenthood and professional life with a kind of synchronized rhythm that most of our friends envied. Sarah, a fellow academic in Michael's department, had become one of my closest friends through these years. Our friendship was one of those fortunate relationships that extended beyond mere convenience and entered the realm of genuine affection and respect. Sarah had been there through every major milestone, my pregnancy, Sophie's birth, and every minor crisis in between. She was vibrant, outspoken, and fiercely intelligent. Our friendship had started on mutual professional respect and a shared love of old jazz music. She knew Michael as well as anyone could in the professional maze of academia. Their friendship, rooted in years of collaboration, seemed just another part of the normalcy of our lives. She was a constant in our lives, trusted implicitly by both Michael and me. Sarah had always been straightforward, which made her recent behavior all the more puzzling to me. In the weeks leading up to that unsettling lunch, I had begun to notice subtle changes in the way she spoke about Michael. It started with offhand comments that seemed to hover on the edge of caution, suggesting I keep a closer eye on him, not just as a husband but in his professional sphere. Each time such a suggestion surfaced, she would quickly steer the conversation towards less delicate topics, like department politics or upcoming college events. "Just watch how he is," Sarah would murmur as we watched Michael interacting with colleagues at a faculty gathering. Then, seeing my furrowed brow, she'd laugh and wave off her previous comment. "I mean, look at how he manages to charm everyone. You snagged quite the catch." It was disconcerting, this pattern of hinting at something amiss and then retreating into platitudes about Michael's charm and professional dedication. My trust in Michael was unwavering. He was not just my husband but also the father of my child, a man who had always upheld the highest standards of integrity and affection in our marriage. How could I suspect him of untoward behavior? Michael was deeply involved in his role as a professor. He had always taken his responsibilities seriously, providing guidance and support to his students while maintaining professional boundaries. His love for us was evident, his commitment unwavering. So, when Sarah insinuated there was something I should be wary of, it felt like a betrayal of the trust I had in him. Each time Sarah made these cryptic comments, I observed Michael more closely, looking for any sign that might justify her insinuations. Yet nothing seemed out of place. His interactions with colleagues and students were as they had always been, respectful and professional. At home, he was the attentive husband and loving father, often talking about his students with pride but never crossing the line into inappropriate fondness or familiarity. But Sarah's behavior grew increasingly odd. At times, she appeared distracted, her gaze lingering on Michael a little too long during social events, her comments more pointed, tinged with an urgency I couldn't understand. "Emily, you know people sometimes change, right? Situations at work can get complicated," she said one evening as we cleaned up after a dinner party. Her tone was serious, lacking its usual lightness. "Sarah, are you okay? You've been a bit off lately," I replied, concerned for my friend who now seemed to carry a burden she was hesitant to share. She paused, a frown creasing her forehead. "It's nothing really, just work stress, I suppose. But you know, it's always good to keep an eye out for everything." Her ambiguity frustrated me. What was she hinting at? If there was a genuine concern, why wouldn't she just say it outright? Sarah's behavior continued to gnaw at me, a constant reminder that something wasn't quite right. Yet, every time I looked at Michael, every time we shared a laugh or a quiet evening together, Sarah's insinuations seemed ridiculous, almost offensive. How could I doubt the man who had been by my side through every significant moment of our lives together? As the weeks passed, I tried to dismiss the unease that Sarah's words had instilled in me. I focused on our family, on the upcoming holidays, on the simple joys of our daily routine. Michael was as present and engaged as ever, his demeanor at home not reflecting any of the concerns Sarah had subtly tried to plant in my mind. Then came the lunch in December, a turning point that forced me to confront the nagging doubt Sarah's strange behavior had sown. We met at a small cafe, a neutral space away from the familiar settings of work or home. Sarah seemed particularly tense that day, her usual vibrant self shadowed by a seriousness that immediately put me on edge. We ordered our food, and for a few moments, we engaged in the usual pleasantries. But as the waiter walked away, Sarah's demeanor shifted. She looked around, ensuring no familiar faces were within earshot, and then turned to me with a solemnity that instantly chilled the air between us. "Emily, I've been beating around the bush for too long, and I'm sorry for that. I need to tell you something important about Michael," she began, her voice low and steady. "It's about him and a student." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The vague hints, the changed behavior, all led to this moment. Despite my deepest fears, I had believed in my husband's fidelity, in the sanctity of our life together. Sarah's next words would challenge everything I thought I knew, forcing me to see beyond the facade of normalcy that I had clung to so desperately. What she disclosed next wasn't just a revelation. It was a shattering of the trust and reality I had built my life around. Then, out of the blue, she voiced a suspicion that had apparently been troubling her for some time. Something, she suggested, might be going on between Michael and a med student. Specifically, a bright young woman who was not just any student, but one who seemed to look at Michael not just as a mentor but perhaps something more. The idea seemed ludicrous. Michael had always maintained a professional distance that bordered on aloofness, his interactions with students uniformly marked by respect and propriety. I laughed it off at first. It seemed so out of character for the man I knew, the man I had spent nearly a decade of my life with, who had always seemed as devoted to me and our daughter as he was on the day we set our vows. But as Sarah described what she called yearning looks, exchanged in moments caught in the corners of classrooms and hallways, my laughter began to sound hollow, even to my own ears. What was I missing? Was the routine that I cherished merely a veneer, hiding a fissure I was too afraid to acknowledge? Despite my initial dismissal, Sarah's words planted a seed of doubt, one that, unbeknownst to me, was about to sprout into a confrontation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about our seemingly perfect life. Finally, she set down her fork, took a deep breath, and said, "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about, and I'm not really sure how to say it." Her voice was serious, and I felt a twinge of anxiety at the gravity of her tone. This was not our usual gossip or chatting about departmental politics. Something was off. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask my concern with a sip of my tea. "It's about Michael," she began, and my heart skipped a beat. I've noticed something off at work. She paused, searching for the right words. It's about how he's been with one of the med students. I felt a defensive wall immediately go up. Michael had always been professional, a model professor, and the suggestion that there might be something inappropriate was jarring. Sarah, what are you talking about? My voice came out a bit sharper than I intended. She flinched slightly, which only made my stomach tighten more. I've seen them together, and it's just the way they look at each other. I've known Michael for years, right? He's never looked at anyone else like that. Not even close, she continued, her eyes now meeting mine with a mixture of concern and apology. Looks? Sarah, you're basing this on looks? I couldn't hide my incredulity. The idea seemed absurd, plucked from thin air or perhaps some daytime drama. It was unlike Sarah to make such vague accusations. Yes, I know it sounds crazy, she admitted, rubbing her temples. I wouldn't have said anything if it wasn't so obvious. It's like watching a slow burn romance movie. He looks at her the way he used to look at you. The words stung, more than I expected. A vivid image of James's tender gazes in our early days flashed through my mind, his eyes filled with unspoken words and promises. It was painful to think of those looks directed at someone else, let alone a student. I'm sure you're overthinking it, I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Michael is devoted to his work and to us. He wouldn't jeopardize that. It's probably just professional admiration or something. You know how passionate he is about mentoring. Sarah nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't upset but still unconvinced. Maybe. But just watch them, okay? I hope I'm wrong. I really do. The rest of our lunch passed in a blur. I kept replaying Sarah's words in my mind, each repetition chipping away at my initial disbelief. By the time we parted ways, a seed of doubt had been firmly planted, despite my efforts to dismiss it. That evening, as Michael came home and wrapped me in a warm familiar embrace, I tried to see any hint of what Sarah had mentioned. He was the same as he had always been with me, caring, loving, asking about my day with genuine interest. But now, a filter of suspicion tinted my perception, coloring his every action, every smile. Later, as we settled down after dinner, I brought it up casually. Sarah and I had lunch today, I mentioned, watching his face for any sign of change. Oh, he responded, looking up from a book. How is she? Good, good. She mentioned something funny though. I forced a chuckle, trying to keep the mood light. She thinks you have a crush on one of your students. He laughed, to dismiss it as ridiculous. Despite Michael's denials and his sudden criticism of Sarah, something inside me refused to settle. His words, intended to cast doubt on Sarah's integrity and divert attention from himself, only fueled my determination to unearth the truth. How could he suddenly turn on Sarah, a friend who had been nothing but supportive to us both? His accusations seemed like desperate attempts to protect himself, and the discrepancy between his words and his actions left a bitter taste in my mouth. On the surface, I maintained a composed façade. I laughed at the right moments, nodded along to his explanations, and pretended to consider his perspective. But beneath that calm exterior, my mind was racing, piecing together every odd remark, every late night at the office, every unexplained absence that had seemed insignificant at the time but now loomed large with suspicion. I knew I needed more than just my instincts and Michael's word against Sarah's. I needed concrete evidence, something undeniable. I began by checking our phone records, something I had never felt the need to do before in our marriage. It felt like a betrayal on my part, an invasion of the trust we had built over the years, but these were desperate times. The phone records showed nothing unusual at first glance, calls to colleagues, his secretary, his brother. But then I noticed a number that recurred more frequently than others, at odd hours, sometimes late into the night. It was a number I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I scribbled it down, a sense of betrayal washing over me anew. Next I turned on our computer at home. Michael was meticulous about logging out of his accounts, but he'd become complacent, perhaps too confident in his ability to cover his tracks. I found his email open, a thread highlighted, and as I clicked on it, I braced myself for what I might find. The emails were careful, guarded, but the underlying tone was unmistakable. They were more than professors and students exchanging academic pleasantries. There was a personal touch, a warmth that should not have been there. Armed with this information, I still felt hollow. Confirmation of Michael's deceit didn't bring the satisfaction I'd hoped for. It only amplified the pain. With every piece of evidence, our marriage felt more like a lie, and the man I thought I knew slipped further away. However, I decided not to face him. Over the next few days, my interactions with Michael remained superficially normal. We spoke about mundane things, Sophie's schedule, grocery lists, the trivialities of daily life that didn't touch the raw nerve of our fractured relationship. Inside, my world was in chaos, but I kept a calm exterior. He was none the wiser, believing perhaps that we were slowly bridging the gap between us, while in truth, I was meticulously planning my next steps and gathering more evidence. The weekend was approaching, and I had already laid my plans. The Nursing Mothers Association, a group I joined after Sophie's birth, had organized a camping trip. It was the perfect alibi to leave home for an extended period without arousing suspicion. I informed Michael only a couple of days beforehand, asserting that it would be a good bonding experience for Sophie and me and a refreshing break for myself. He responded with enthusiasm, overly so, which now seemed another red flag in his recent behavior. "Have a great time," he said, smiling. "You both deserve this break. Don't worry about anything here." His ready agreement to our absence gave me the window I needed. I'd arranged for a neighbor, ostensibly to check on our house in my absence, but in reality, to observe Michael's movements when he thought he was unwatched. This neighbor, Jenna, was a trusted friend who was aware of my situation and willing to help. The camping trip itself was a much-needed distraction. Being around other women, sharing stories and laughter, allowed me to breathe a little easier, even if just for a day. Sophie loved the outdoors, her laughter mingling with the breeze, her joy at the simple things, a butterfly, the crackle of a campfire, helping to lift the weight from my chest. Meanwhile, Jenna texted me updates. Michael had left the house mid-morning and didn't return until late in the afternoon. She couldn't see where he went but noted the time for later reference. When he returned, he brought someone with him. My heart sank reading her message. The visitor was female, young, and they seemed comfortable with each other. Too comfortable. Jenna couldn't get close enough to hear conversations without risking being seen but managed to snap a few photos from her upstairs window. Returning home late Sunday, I felt a mix of dread and anger. The atmosphere in the house was too calm, Michael too casual. He asked about the camping, his curiosity feigning innocence. I shared anecdotes of our outing, all the while feeling a nauseating mix of betrayal and resolve churning inside me. The next day, after Michael left for work and Sophie was at her daycare, I met with Jenna to collect the photos. The images were grainy, but the intimacy was unmistakable. Their proximity, their body language, and the ease between them. It was more than enough to confirm my suspicions. Armed with this new evidence, I knew I had to confront Michael. But first, I needed more concrete proof, something undeniable that would prevent him from weaving more lies. I contacted a private investigator, recommended by a lawyer friend. Discretion was key, and the investigator assured me he could discreetly track Michael's movements and interactions over the next few weeks. As the investigation unfolded, I maintained a veneer of normalcy at home. Michael seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, perhaps blinded by his own duplicity, or convinced of his ability to conceal his affair. But the strain of living a double life, playing the part of the dutiful wife while secretly orchestrating an investigation into my husband's infidelity, was exhausting. Finally, the investigator provided me with a report. It included times, places, even audio recordings of conversations between Michael and the student. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. They spoke of their feelings for each other, their plans to keep their relationship secret until the timing was right, whatever that meant. With the proof in hand, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This was not just a fleeting mistake on Michael's part, but a deliberate, ongoing betrayal. I decided it was time to confront him, not just as his wife, but as someone who deserved the truth. The confrontation was planned for an evening when Sophie was staying over at a friend's house. I didn't want her to witness the potential fallout. When Michael came home, I was sitting in the living room, the pile of evidence laid out on the coffee table in front of me. He sensed something was off the moment he walked in. His smile faltered as he saw the papers and photos spread out, his eyes widening as he took in their implications. "Emily, what is this?" His voice was shaky, the usual confidence gone. "It's over, Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I know everything. There's no point in denying it any longer." He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The next few hours were a blur of accusations, tears, and confessions. Michael pleaded for forgiveness, promising to end the affair and do whatever it took to repair our marriage. But something inside me had broken beyond repair. The trust was shattered, and no amount of remorse could rebuild it. I asked him to leave, to give me space to think about the future. He left, defeated, carrying a small suitcase with his belongings. The house felt empty, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions that had filled it just hours before. In the days that followed, I consulted with my lawyer to discuss the next steps. Divorce seemed the inevitable conclusion, not out of spite but necessity. I needed to rebuild, to create a stable, honest life for Sophie and myself. As I navigated the complexities of separation and legal proceedings, I also reached out to a therapist to begin working through the emotional fallout of the betrayal. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of agency over my own life. Looking back, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. For the marriage I thought I had, for the partner I believed Michael to be. But there was also a growing sense of resilience, a knowledge that I could face whatever came next. For Sophie, for myself, I would build a new life, one rooted in honesty and strength. The journey was just beginning, but I was ready to face it head on. My husband and my best friend had an affair. I pretended to be a room attendant to catch them. My life, as I knew it, was unremarkably happy, a sentiment that, though plain, encapsulated all I held dear. I had managed to build a family, one that, against odds and through challenges, felt both complete and complex in its everyday normalcy. My husband James, a charming and spirited man of 39, stood at the center of my universe. Our journey together hadn't been straightforward or easy. He had come into our marriage with baggage. A son from his previous marriage and a past tangled with unresolved issues that led to his divorce. His ex-wife had struggled with personal demons, leaving James to shield their son, Lucas, from the fallout. When James and I married 7 years ago, I welcomed both into my life with open arms, embracing Lucas as my own. Now 9, Lucas had grown into a thoughtful, quiet boy, whose moments of laughter were both rare and precious. Lucas lived with us full-time, his presence a constant reminder of the life James had before me, and a life I had willingly stepped into. I treated Lucas with all the affection and care I would my own flesh and blood, and in many ways, he was just that to me. Our bond was strong, despite the initial adjustment and the invisible lines that blended and blurred over time. Then, 3 years after marrying James, we welcomed another boy into our world, Ethan. Ethan, with his father's eyes and an infectious smile, was a living testament to the happiness and love James and I shared. At 5 years old, Ethan was the light of our household, often pulling Lucas into his childish games, which Lucas indulged with a patience that was beyond his years. Our life in a cozy, suburban neighborhood was filled with the typical hustle and bustle of family activities, school events, weekend soccer games, and family dinners that were noisy with chatter and laughter. James, with his job that often put him in the public eye locally, was a well-known figure in our community. This visibility never seemed to affect our quiet home life. Instead, it filled it with a sense of pride. We laughed more than we argued, a balance that I had come to cherish deeply. My best friend Claire had been by my side since our college days. She was married to a wealthy businessman who, while providing a life of luxury, failed to meet her deeper needs, especially in their bedroom. Claire often confided in me about her marital frustrations. Her voice a mixture of envy and despair when she compared her emotional and sexual dissatisfaction with the vibrancy she saw in my marriage. She was always there, a fixture in my life, sharing everything with me as I did with her. Despite her personal discontent, Claire's frequent visits and our daily conversations never hinted at anything amiss. She was Auntie Claire to my boys, a role she relished despite her own lack of desire for children. Her presence was a comfort, an echo of a past that both of us shared and held onto through our transitioning lives. Our families intertwined not out of necessity but choice. Claire and her husband, often joining us for barbecues and birthday parties, seemed just another branch of our extended family tree. These gatherings, filled with laughter and casual joy, painted a picture of harmony. James had always been a loving and attentive husband. His expressions of affection were frequent and heartfelt, whether it was a surprise bouquet of flowers or a simple note left on the fridge saying how much he loved me. But slowly, I began to notice shifts in his behavior that, at the time, seemed insignificant, but now screamed with meaning. There were the evenings when James would come home from work, his face drawn, not with the usual fatigue of a long day, but with a pensiveness that seemed to cloud his eyes. When I asked if everything was all right, he would flash me a brief, tight smile and assure me everything was fine, attributing his mood to an especially challenging day. His eyes, once so quick to meet mine, now often diverted away, as if holding my gaze was too much to bear. Then there were the text messages. I remember one night, lying beside him as he typed away on his phone. I glanced over curious about who he was texting so late. He quickly angled the screen away and said it was just a work email he had to respond to urgently. His expression was too calm, practiced, and it prickled my senses with unease, but I pushed those feelings away, chastising myself for being overly suspicious. With Claire the changes were even more pronounced, though cloaked in subtleties that only in retrospect reveal their true weight. She had always been open and vibrant, sharing every detail of her life with an almost brutal honesty. But as the months passed, her vivacity dimmed. She became more reserved, her laughter less frequent, and her visits shorter. When she did come over, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and there was a hesitation in her actions, as if she were constantly on the verge of saying something more but thought better of it. I remember one particular afternoon when Claire and I had met for lunch. She seemed unusually distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. I had jokingly asked if she had a secret lover she was keeping from me. She had laughed it off, but there was a flash of something in her expression, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, that made me pause. But then she quickly changed the subject, gushing about a new restaurant she wanted us to try, and the moment passed. Our conversations, once filled with earnest depth, had taken on a superficial quality. She asked about my life, my family, but it was as if she was going through the motions. I shared stories of James and the kids, unaware that each word might be a sting to her conscience. Looking back, I can almost pinpoint the exact moments when her discomfort was most palpable, especially when I talked about James with affection and pride. One evening, the four of us, James, Claire, her husband, and I, had dinner at our place. I noticed how Claire's laughter seemed forced, how she and James accidentally exchanged looks that they both quickly smothered. It was as if they were both in a play, each performing their part but with a falter here and there that only a discerning eye would catch. After they left that night, the air felt charged, heavy with unspoken words and unasked questions. James was unusually quiet, retreating into a shell that I couldn't seem to penetrate. When I asked if he was okay, he brushed it off, mumbling something about being tired. But his eyes avoided mine, and there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there earlier. These signs, these tiny cracks in the facade of our daily lives, were there, forming a pattern I only now fully see. The pain of realizing that not only was my husband unfaithful, but that my best friend was his accomplice, cuts deeper than anything I've ever felt. It shakes the very foundation of what I believed my life to be, leaving me to wonder how I missed the signs when they were so clearly there, painting a picture of betrayal right before my eyes. The day I discovered the devastating truth about my husband and my best friend Claire, started like any other. It was a sunny Tuesday, and I was busy organizing the house while Ethan played in the living room. My phone buzzed with the arrival of a message. Expecting it to be a reminder or a message from a family member, I checked it casually, but what I saw was neither. It was an anonymous text, simply stating a hotel name and room number. The sender was unknown, and my heart sank with a dreadful premonition. Confusion and fear mingled with a sharp sting of betrayal as I read and reread the message. Why would someone send me this? Was it a mistake? Or was it something more sinister? Despite every rational part of me screaming to dismiss it, the seed of doubt had been planted. I needed to know the truth. I arranged for my neighbor to watch Ethan, giving some vague excuse about an unexpected errand. My hands shook as I drove to the hotel, the address burning in my mind with every mile that passed. As I parked the car, my breaths were short, each one heavier than the last. I walked to the room, my legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. Standing outside the door, I hesitated. The fear of what I might find on the other side gripped me. But I had to know. I mustered all the courage I had left and knocked softly. "Come in. Why are you taking so long? Help me clean up my spilled wine," a familiar voice called from inside. It was Claire's voice, casual and irritated. My heart pounded against my chest as I pushed the door open, feigning the role of a hotel employee. The scene before me was like a still from a nightmare. My husband, James, was out on the balcony, his back to the room, seemingly caught up in a phone call. Claire was sprawled on the bed, a glass of wine tipped over on the bedside table, its contents staining the crisp white sheets. I bent down, pretending to clean up, my hands trembling as I grasped the cloth. Claire continued to talk, unaware of who I really was. "You know, he's the only one who can satisfy me," she said, a moan of contentment lacing her voice as she referred to my husband. "I've always been so jealous of her, living such a perfect life," she added bitterly. I froze, the cloth in my hand forgotten. Her words echoed in the room, each syllable slicing through me like a blade. She spoke of her husband then, deriding him as physically weak and inadequate. The casual cruelty of her words, the ease with which she dismissed her vows, shook me to my core. I stood my disguise as a cleaner forgotten, as I faced the reality of their betrayal. My presence still unnoticed, I watched as James turned from the balcony, his face lighting up as he saw Claire. The affection in his eyes was unmistakable, and it was not directed at me. Feeling nauseous, I backed away, the room spinning around me. I managed to stumble out before they saw me, my heart breaking with each step. Outside, the cool air hit my face, but it did nothing to ease the heat of my shame, anger, and sorrow. I vomited in the bushes outside the hotel, the physical purging a pathetic echo of the emotional turmoil inside. The drive home was a blur. My mind replayed the scene over and over, each detail a torment. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to me, to us, to our family? The questions spiraled, each one unanswered, each one a further descent into despair. I arrived home to the sound of Ethan laughing as he played. The normalcy of the scene was a stark contrast to the chaos within me. How could I reconcile the world I thought I knew with the deceit I had just witnessed? That night, after Ethan was in bed, I sat alone in the darkness of the living room, waiting for James to come home. The waiting was excruciating, each minute stretching out endlessly. When he finally arrived, his smile faltered at the sight of me, my red-rimmed eyes and pale face undoubtedly telling more than I could say with words. "Is everything all right?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice that now sounded hollow. How could I begin to confront him? How could I explain the agony his actions had caused? The room felt suffocating as I struggled to find the words. The anonymous message from the morning nagged at me. A puzzle piece that didn't fit, its origin still a mystery that I needed to solve. My mind wouldn't allow me to rest, not yet. I slipped out of the bedroom quietly, careful not to disturb James, and made my way to the living room. The house was silent, shadows playing along the walls as the streetlights cast dim glows through the windows. Sitting on the sofa, I pulled out my phone and dialed the anonymous number once more, my heart racing with a mix of dread and determination. The phone rang, cutting through the quiet darkness of the room. It rang longer than I expected, each tone echoing my escalating tension. Then, surprisingly, there was an answer. The voice on the other end was immediately recognizable, though I had never expected to hear it in this context. It was Claire's husband, Mark. "Why did you send me that message?" I asked, my voice a mix of confusion and anger. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that spoke volumes before Mark even uttered a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tinged with a bitterness that I hadn't heard before. "I thought it was time you knew the truth," he said simply, yet the weight of his words felt heavy and complex. "When did you find out?" I pressed on, needing to understand why he, of all people, would be the one to inform me. "I've had my suspicions for a while," Mark confessed, his tone resigned. "I confirmed it a few days ago. I saw them together, much like you did today." The revelation stung. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the casualness of their deceit, how it seemed to unravel so easily to those looking closely enough. "Why tell me this way? Why not confront Claire or even James?" I asked, my voice cracking with the strain of the day's emotions. Mark sighed, a sound of deep weariness traveling through the line. "Because Claire has never been honest with me, not really. I knew she married me for my money, but I thought maybe there was something more, eventually. I wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me, by ripping apart the facade she's been living with you, with everyone." His words revealed a pain and a vindictiveness that made me shudder. It was a retaliation meant to wound deeply, indiscriminately. "But did you think about how this would affect me, my family?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my grip tightening around the phone. "I did," he admitted, and his voice softened slightly. "And I'm sorry for the collateral damage. I didn't want to hurt you or your kids. You deserve better than this, all of you do. I couldn't see any other way to make her feel the consequences of her actions." The conversation drifted into an awkward silence, both of us lost in our own turmoil. Here was a man, broken by betrayal, lashing out in his pain, and here was I, a casualty of his revenge. It was too much to take in, too cruel and tangled to fully comprehend in the shadow of my own heartbreak. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I finally said, not expecting an answer, not really wanting one either. "No, I guess not," Mark responded, his voice a mix of resignation and sorrow. "But maybe, in time, we can both find some peace, knowing the truth. Maybe we can rebuild something from the ruins, even if it's not what we had before." The line went dead then, and I was left with the echoes of our conversation. The night stretched on, endless and heavy. Mark's motives, though fueled by his own pain, had thrust me unwillingly into the role of avenger in his marital drama, exposing wounds in my life that might never fully heal. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, staring into the darkness. The truth was out, a bitter pill that offered no real comfort, only more questions and the daunting task of navigating what was left of my marriage and my friendship. As dawn began to break, the first light casting a pale glow into the room, I knew that the path ahead was uncertain. Forgiveness seemed as distant as the fading stars, and trust, once broken, loomed as a colossal challenge to rebuild. But in that moment of early morning clarity, I realized that whatever decisions lay ahead, They would start with facing the day, and the consequences, head on. I woke up from an uneasy slumber, a night marred by turmoil and haunted by the echoes of betrayal. The weight of discovery sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Despite the unrest, I had made a decision the previous night. I needed to talk to James, face to face, to resolve this excruciating mess we found ourselves in. I wanted answers, needed closure, or at least the beginning of a conversation about where we stood. My plan was to meet him tonight, after the kids were asleep, a time we could talk undisturbed. With this resolve, I reached for my phone to text him, a simple message to confirm our talk. But as the screen lit up, I was met not with the quiet icons of my home screen, but with notifications flooding in. A storm of alerts and messages that immediately set my nerves on edge. Curiosity mixed with dread, I opened the social media app to find the source of the commotion. There, on my feed, was something so shockingly personal and devastating that it knocked the wind out of me. A video, unmistakably featuring James and Claire, in a very compromising, intimate scene. It was posted by an anonymous account, but the content was explicit, leaving no room for doubt about what it depicted, or who was involved. The reality that our private agony was now public spectacle was paralyzing. I knew immediately it was Mark's doing. His previous actions, the pain in his voice last night, painted a clear picture of a man driven to the edge by heartbreak and betrayal. His method of exposing the affair, so raw and cruel, was the act of someone consumed by revenge, not just intent on reclaiming his dignity, but on destroying everything in his path. As I stared at the screen, numb and disbelieving, my phone began to ring, jolting me from the shock. It was relentless, buzzing again and again, vibrating with an urgency that mirrored the chaos now exploding around me. Journalists, friends, acquaintances, news of this scandal was spreading like wildfire, and everyone wanted a piece of the drama, a comment, a reaction. "Oh my God," I murmured to the empty room. Everything was falling apart, unraveling faster than I could have ever anticipated. The conversation I had planned with James, meant to be a private affair to mend or end what was left of our marriage, was now irrelevant. The world had intruded, cruel and uninvited, into our lives. My heart raced as I tried to process the rapid collapse of my privacy and personal life. This video, this vile breach of our intimate moments, changed everything. There was no room now for quiet discussions or contemplative reconciliations. The issue demanded immediate attention, not just as a personal betrayal but as a public spectacle that was spiraling out of control. With shaking hands I dialed James's number. He answered quickly, his voice tense, aware already of the digital wildfire consuming our lives. "Have you seen it?" was all I could ask, my voice a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. "Yes, I've seen it," he replied, his voice heavy with regret and something else. Fear, perhaps. "I'm so sorry, this isn't how I wanted." "How you wanted what, James? For me to find out? For everything to end?" I cut him off, unable to contain the torrent of emotions. "It's everywhere. Our friends, family, everyone has seen it. How do we even begin to handle this?" There was a pause, heavy and laden with the weight of our crumbling world. "I'm coming home. We need to talk, face to face. We need to figure out what to do about everything." The call ended, leaving me in a turmoil of thoughts and emotions. I knew that whatever came next would be incredibly challenging. Facing the public humiliation, dealing with the betrayal, and navigating the fallout with our children and our families, there was no easy path forward. The hours until James's return were agonizing. I sat, enveloped in a haze of anxiety and betrayal, trying to brace myself for the confrontation to come. How do you confront a betrayal that's become a public circus? How do you reclaim any sense of normalcy when your private life has been laid bare for all to see? When James finally walked through the door that evening, the look on his face told me he was as devastated by the exposure as I was by the betrayal. We sat across from each other, the weight of unspoken words heavy between us. This wasn't just about us anymore, it was about our children, our families, and the indelible marks this scandal would leave on all our lives. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. We discussed immediate steps to protect our privacy, ways to handle the media, and most importantly, how to address this with our children. We talked about the potential for legal action against Mark for the invasion of privacy and the dissemination of the video. Through it all, the need for decisions about the future of our marriage loomed large. But those decisions were for another day. Right now, we needed to manage the crisis at hand, to protect our family from further fallout, and to begin the arduous process of healing, whatever that might look like. After James had come home and we'd begun to tentatively address the fallout from the scandal that was now openly unfolding, I knew there was one more call I needed to make. Despite the raw emotions and the deep sense of betrayal, I needed to contact Mark. The urgency to protect what little remained of our family's privacy propelled me into action. I found a quiet corner in the chaos of our home, my hands trembling as I dialed Mark's number. The phone rang, each tone echoing in the emptiness of the room, magnifying my anxiety. When he finally answered, his voice was cold, distant. "Mark, please," I started, my voice pleading. "You have to take down the video. Think about my sons. Think about what this will do to them if they see it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him weighing his options, his breath a soft but audible intake. "I posted that video for a reason." Mark's voice was resolute, tinged with the bitterness that had likely driven him to expose the affair so publicly. "I understand you're hurt," I continued, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "But my children have nothing to do with this. They are innocent. Please, don't let them suffer because of our mistakes." Mark's reply was a sigh, long and weary. "You think I want to hurt children?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. "You think I haven't thought about that?" "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be," I said, trying to connect with the part of him that had once been our friend, before all this bitterness took hold. "But please, reconsider what this will do to them. They could lose friends, be bullied. Their whole world could change. And once something is on the internet, it's there forever." There was another silence, longer this time. I held my breath, waiting, hoping that my words had reached him, had reminded him of the man who used to come to our home, who had laughed and dined with us, who wasn't this person consumed by revenge. Finally he spoke again, his voice less certain than before. "I don't want to hurt your kids, I don't," he admitted, and his words seemed to carry a weight of realization, as if seeing the broader impact of his actions for the first time. "But Claire and James, they did this, not me. They did, and they are dealing with it," I assured him, my voice firm. "But our children shouldn't have to. Please, Mark, do this for them. Take the video down." We talked a little more. I told him about Ethan's recent school achievements, how he was just starting to really enjoy his soccer games. I mentioned Lucas's quiet strength, how he had been dealing with so much already between the complexities of his blended family life and normal childhood challenges. With each word, I hoped to humanize the situation, to bring it back from the abstract online world to the very real, very affected lives of these two little boys. Mark finally conceded, his voice a mixture of defeat and clarity. "Okay," he said. "I'll take it down. Not for James or Claire, but for the kids." I thanked him, relief flooding through me, though tempered by the knowledge of the lingering effects of his initial decision. We ended the call on a note of strained civility, the connection forever altered but with a sliver of respect for his final choice to protect my children. After hanging up, the relief was palpable, but so was the gravity of what still lay ahead. The video might be taken down, but the damage was done. Rumors had been ignited, conversations started, and the digital footprint, though now less traceable, would never be completely erased. The task of facing our friends, family, and especially our children with the truth loomed large. How to explain such adult failures to such young minds was a puzzle I was still piecing together. The forthcoming days would require careful navigation, as James and I would need to shield our sons from as much fallout as possible, while also preparing to answer their questions with honesty appropriate for their age. In the wake of the scandal that crumbled the facade of my once seemingly perfect life, the days that followed were some of the most challenging I had ever faced. The very foundation of my existence, my marriage, had been irrevocably altered by betrayal, and the aftermath was a painful navigation through a landscape I hardly recognized. The morning after I successfully persuaded Mark to take down the incriminating video, James approached me with a solemnity that was uncharacteristic of the man I had known. He held a set of divorce papers in his hands, his eyes avoiding mine as he placed them gently on the kitchen table where we had shared countless family meals and light-hearted conversations. "I think it's best if we do this," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I don't deserve your forgiveness or your feelings anymore." The finality in his voice cut through the air, sharper than any words he had uttered the night before. I looked at the papers, a cold hard reality settling over me. Despite the tumult of emotions, a part of me had clung to the hope of reconciliation, not just for our sake but for our sons. But in that moment, as I watched James, defeated and resigned, I understood that our path forward needed to be apart. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers, each stroke of my name a silent testament to the years we had shared and the future we would not. I didn't contest much. I just asked for primary custody of our sons, ensuring they would have stability and continuity in their lives as much as possible. James agreed without hesitation, the guilt etching deeper lines into his face. Once everything was settled legally, I took our youngest son, Ethan, and moved to a nearby apartment. It was a modest place but filled with potential for a new beginning, a space just for us, away from the shadows of past betrayals. Meanwhile, Claire's life unraveled in ways more dramatic and public than I could have imagined. After her affair with James and the subsequent fallout, Mark, driven by a blend of betrayal and vindication, ensured that Claire would not benefit from their divorce. Armed with evidence of her adultery, he barred her from claiming any significant part of his considerable wealth. Last I heard, she was sent away empty-handed, a fitting end to her duplicitous maneuvers. But Claire's descent didn't stop there. Recently the news broke that she had been arrested for corporate corruption. It seemed her unethical behaviors were not limited to her personal life but had permeated her professional dealings as well. While part of me felt vindicated that Claire was facing justice, another part of me was saddened by the sheer waste of her potential, and the destruction of the person I once considered a close friend. As for my life, it has taken a turn toward rebuilding and refocusing on the future. The divorce, though painful, allowed me to start anew, focusing solely on raising Ethan and ensuring that Lucas, though he lived with James, remained a central part of our lives. The challenge, however, has been dealing with the emotional and psychological impact on Ethan. The absence of his father in our daily life has been a significant adjustment for him. James tries to be present, coming by to visit and taking Ethan out on weekends. But the once seamless nature of our family life is now a patchwork of scheduled visits and shared custody. Ethan, only 5 years old, struggles with this new reality. He often asks when Daddy is coming home, and on days when he realizes that the home he knew is no more, his confusion turns into quiet sorrow. Seeing my son grapple with these feelings has been heart-wrenching. Despite the anger and betrayal I felt towards James, I've encouraged a healthy relationship between him and Ethan, believing that whatever issues we had as spouses should not taint their father-son bond. We both agreed to attend family therapy to help Ethan adjust to the changes, and while it has been helpful, the road is undoubtedly long and filled with uncertainties. In this new chapter of our lives, I've had to be both mother and father in many ways, trying to fill the gaps left by James's absence. I've also had to navigate my own healing process, dealing with the lingering feelings of betrayal and the task of forgiving enough to move forward, if not for myself, then for the sake of Ethan. As I focus on rebuilding our lives, my resolve strengthens. I have found solace in returning to work, in strengthening bonds with family and friends who have shown unwavering support through these tumultuous times. The community around us has been a steady source of comfort and stability, and I'm grateful for every gesture of kindness and understanding they have extended towards us. Despite the scars left by the events of the past months, I am hopeful. Life, though unpredictable and often painful, also brings opportunities for growth and new beginnings. For Ethan, for Lucas, and for myself, I am committed to building a future defined not by the failures and betrayals of the past, but by the possibilities of what is yet to come. As we move forward, one day at a time, I hold on to the hope that with love, resilience, and a bit of courage, we can find peace and happiness again. My girlfriend repeatedly deceived me and stole money to gamble. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore, and I kicked my pregnant girlfriend out. My name is David, and I'm 26 years old. Jenna and I first met through mutual friends, and from our initial interactions, it was clear we had a unique connection. She was 22, just starting her career in retail, brimming with an enthusiasm for life that was simply infectious. I worked in IT, had a stable job, and had recently secured a modest but cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the city. It wasn't long before Jenna moved in with me, and we began building a life together in that small space I was proud to call home. From the outset, Jenna was adamant about contributing financially. Despite my reservations, given the newness of our relationship, she insisted on paying her share, eager to establish our partnership on equal footing. This insistence seemed to underline her commitment to our relationship and her desire to be responsible and independent. Jenna brought a vibrancy to my life that was hard to miss. Her laughter was infectious, her spirit indomitable. When we were together, it felt like we could conquer any challenge that came our way. This sense of partnership was bolstered when Jenna, amidst her joyous tears, told me she was pregnant. The news brought a new dimension to our relationship. It was no longer just about us, but about the future we were going to build for our growing family. In light of the pregnancy, we began making more concrete plans. The idea of marriage, which had floated in our conversations as a someday thought, suddenly took on immediate importance. We decided to register our marriage soon, ensuring that everything would be in place when our child arrived. The plan was to have a small intimate ceremony after the birth, celebrating our new family in the presence of our closest friends and family. These plans filled our home with a new kind of energy. We started organizing the apartment, turning the spare room into a nursery, picking out colors and themes, and discussing baby names in the evenings. Every step we took was a step toward crafting the life we had envisioned together. However, In the midst of this hopeful planning, the reality of Jenna's financial struggles and her inability to break away from her family's demands remained a looming issue. We knew that addressing these problems was critical, not just for the stability of our relationship, but for the well-being of our child. It began subtly, with Jenna often appearing stressed around the end of the month, her demeanor shadowed by the looming pressure of bills and debts. I knew about her financial commitments, but the depth of her struggles became evident only when certain discrepancies came to light under our shared roof. Initially, Jenna had promised to handle her finances more responsibly, and to contribute regularly to our shared expenses. However, as time passed, her contributions became sporadic, and her excuses grew in frequency. I started noticing more signs of financial distress, unopened bills piled up on the counter, and increasingly frantic phone conversations that she tried to shield from me. Armed with the truth and a heavy heart, I confronted Jenna that evening. It was one of the most challenging conversations of my life. I asked her about the letters, the gambling, and the clothes. At first, she tried to deny it, but faced with the evidence, she broke down. Jenna revealed how her family had always relied on her financially. Since securing her first job, she had been the pillar her family leaned on for financial support. This expectation, deeply ingrained from a young age, had burgeoned into a relentless cycle of demands and guilt. Every payday, her phone would light up with messages from her mother or sisters, each one a new plea for money. The reasons varied: rent, medical bills, urgent repairs, or just making ends meet. The amounts she sent home left little for her own needs, let alone our shared expenses. The gambling, she confessed, began as a desperate measure to meet both her family's demands and our household expenses. What started as an attempt to quickly double a small sum spiraled out of control, pulling her deeper into the quagmire of addiction. She described how the thrill of a potential win was soon overshadowed by the despair of consecutive losses, each gamble a further step away from financial stability. The discussion about the stolen clothes was particularly painful. Jenna tearfully admitted that she had taken them to give as gifts to her family, who expected presents even when she couldn't afford them. She was trying to maintain a facade of stability and generosity with them, even while drowning financially. This revelation was a turning point in our relationship. The trust that formed the foundation of our life together had been severely damaged. I felt betrayed and hurt, but also deeply concerned for Jenna. She was caught in a destructive cycle, manipulated by her family's demands, and struggling with a gambling issue that was her misguided solution to financial pressure. After confronting Jenna about her gambling and the financial deceit, I realized that the situation couldn't continue as it was. It was a difficult conversation, one that required laying everything on the table: the deceit, the theft, the gambling, all of it. I told Jenna that for us to move forward, there needed to be complete transparency and a commitment to change. The future of our relationship and the well-being of our soon-to-be expanded family depended on it. Jenna's response was solemn but hopeful. She acknowledged the pain she had caused and expressed her determination to make things right. She agreed to my request to have regular access to her bank statements. It was a practical measure, not one I took any pleasure in demanding, but necessary to rebuild the trust she had broken. She also agreed to set up a strict budget for personal spending, and contribute a fixed amount monthly towards household expenses, directly from her paycheck. The revelations of that day changed everything. Trust, the cornerstone of any relationship, had been deeply eroded. The path ahead was uncertain. Could I trust Jenna again? Could our relationship survive the twin shadows of deceit and addiction? These questions haunted me, but amidst the turmoil, a resolve formed within me. I cared deeply for Jenna, and if there was a chance to salvage our future together, I was willing to try. Update. For a while, things seemed to improve. Jenna appeared more open about her finances, showing me her bank statements without hesitation. She made her contributions to the household consistently, and we even started to have open discussions about money, something that had always been a tension point for us. It felt like we were finally making progress, rebuilding the trust and partnership we had once taken for granted. However, this period of improvement was short-lived. The facade of recovery crumbled one evening about 3 months after our initial confrontation. Jenna had been more withdrawn than usual, a sign I had come to recognize as indicative of underlying stress. While she was in the kitchen, her phone lit up with a notification that caught my eye. Loan accepted by ex-lender, click here to accept. My heart sank. When Jenna returned, I confronted her immediately. The trust I had been cautiously rebuilding shattered with the sight of that message. She broke down, confessing that despite her earlier promises, she had taken out another payday loan. She explained that her expenses had overrun her budget this month, more than she had admitted, and she felt this was her only way out. Her justification did little to assuage the sense of betrayal. I reminded her of our agreement: no more loans, no more secrets. Yet here we were again, facing the same issue of hidden debts and financial irresponsibility. It was a painful realization that despite her promises, Jenna hadn't fully committed to changing her behavior or addressing the underlying issues that led to her financial recklessness. I asked to see her bank statements, something she had agreed to share openly. This time, however, she refused, claiming that I was being controlling, and that she needed to handle her finances independently to truly learn from her mistakes. This refusal was a red flag, indicating that not only was Jenna backsliding, but she was also not ready to fully confront her issues as we had planned. The confrontation that night did not resolve anything. Jenna's reluctance to show her bank statements and her decision to take out another loan without discussing it with me first showed that our earlier resolutions were superficial. The underlying issues, her handling of financial pressure, her dependency on quick fixes like loans, and her inability to resist impulses to spend, remained unaddressed. The tension in the air was palpable as I confronted Jenna about the latest incident, the missing cash and the money ostensibly used to pay for the sofa that had been sold to her mother. It was a few weeks after Jenna had moved back in a bid to provide stability for our soon-to-arrive baby. However, the peace was short-lived. I had discovered that a substantial amount of cash, money that was a gift and meant for our future needs, particularly with the baby on the way, was missing. Compounding this issue was the fact that Jenna's mother had only partially paid for the sofa, despite agreeing to pay the full amount, and now claimed dissatisfaction with its condition as a pretext to delay further payments. When I brought up these issues, Jenna's initial reaction was defensive. She vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming ignorance about the missing cash. But the evidence was too concrete, the circumstances too coincidental. The trust I had tried to rebuild was crumbling rapidly under the weight of continual deceit. Her defensiveness quickly turned to accusations. Jenna claimed that my focus on finances and tracking every penny was controlling, that it overshadowed her emotional and physical needs, especially during her pregnancy. She argued that my insistence on transparency and accountability was a form of surveillance, not partnership. The cycle of deceit had not been broken, and the realization was a bitter pill to swallow. The trust that is so crucial in any relationship was once again in jeopardy, and with a baby on the way, the stakes were higher than ever. This was not just about us anymore, it was about the future and stability of our family. The pain of her betrayal was compounded by the fear of how her actions could affect our child. The conversation escalated, emotions running high. I was torn between the hurt from her betrayals and the empathy I felt for her as the mother of my child. It was a moral and emotional quagmire, pulling at the very fibers of my being. How could I balance these feelings with the clear pattern of dishonesty and manipulation that had emerged? Update 2. The problems reached a peak last week when I decided it was time for a serious conversation with Jenna. Our relationship, already strained by her past actions, was at a crossroads, and with a baby on the way, I felt it necessary to establish clear ground rules. I sat her down and explained earnestly that our dynamic needed to change drastically. We're a family, I told her, emphasizing that the birth of our child meant we needed a solid foundation, free from secrets and financial instability. I made it clear that openness about finances was non-negotiable, insisting she needed to contribute more consistently to household expenses and cease accumulating debt she couldn't afford. A habit that had caused much stress and discord in our relationship. Jenna seemed receptive and agreed to my terms. She promised to be more transparent with her finances, including showing me her bank statements regularly, and committed to cutting down on her spending. For a moment, it felt like we were making progress. Perhaps we were finally turning a corner toward a healthier partnership. She moved back in, and I believed that we were starting to mend our relationship. However, this hope was short-lived. Just last night, while Jenna was in the kitchen, a notification popped up on her phone. It was a message from a lender, confirming a loan that had just been approved. My heart sank. It was as if all the promises she had just made were nothing but air. Confronting her immediately, I asked her about the loan. Tears welled up in her eyes as she admitted she had no money left for the month and had resorted to taking out a payday loan. Her confession was a blow to any trust that had been rebuilt. I reminded her sternly that we had agreed on no more loans, that she should have come to me first. Jenna's response was one of despair. She said she couldn't afford her share of the bills again. Despite her full-time job, her income was erratic, often reduced to sick pay due to frequent absences, which didn't cover much. Frustrated, I asked to see her bank statements for proof of her financial status and to understand where her money was going. She refused and accused me of being controlling, arguing that I didn't need to see her finances since she had already told me about them. This refusal was the final straw for me. I suspected that not only was she possibly still gambling, but she might also be funneling money to her family again. In a moment of desperation to highlight the severity of our situation, I posed a hypothetical scenario to her. What would you do if our baby was starving and there was no food in the house? Her answer was dismissive and chilling. You'll have to pay. This response confirmed my worst fears about her priorities. I then asked to check her Facebook Messenger to see if her family was still requesting money, but discovered that she had deleted all her messages with the family members who usually borrowed money from her. She claimed she deleted them to keep things tidy, yet all other messages were intact. At that point, I knew our relationship was beyond repair. Jenna labeled me a controlling freak, and we haven't spoken since. Reflecting on our relationship, I suspect that her issues are deeply rooted in her upbringing, issues that she is either unwilling or unable to confront and change. I know a lot of people questioned whether she's pregnant, how stupid I was to get her pregnant. I agree, and if it's mine. I've been to every scan so I know she's pregnant. As for if it's mine, I've never suspected cheating, but she's a serial liar, so I will be forcing a DNA test through the courts. I posted on a couple of different subs to make sure I wasn't getting biased opinions. The above story is 100% true, but my focus is now getting as far away as possible from her for my own sake. Despite the personal feelings and the breakdown of our relationship, I remain committed to being involved in my child's life. I've attended every prenatal scan and am confident about Jenna's pregnancy. However, given the deceit surrounding other aspects of her life, I'm planning to request a DNA test to eliminate any doubts about paternity. This isn't about trust, it's about ensuring that every step forward is based on transparency and truth. Update 3. A couple of weeks ago, I made the decision to let Jenna back into the house after learning she was bouncing around, staying on sofas at family members' and friends' homes. She was about 8 months pregnant at the time, and my concern was mainly for the well-being of our unborn child. In hindsight, I see this as a mistake, one that I deeply regret for reasons I'm about to share. We had recently moved to a new house, and during the times I was out, Jenna took charge of most of the unpacking. Hidden in a living room cabinet drawer was a significant sum of cash, approximately $400–500, a Christmas gift from my parents. During this period, I also decided to sell some old furniture, including a sofa that Jenna persistently asked me to sell to her mother. Despite my reservations, I agreed, influenced by Jenna's repeated requests. She explained that her mother wanted to borrow money to pay for the sofa, and would settle the payment a couple of weeks later. I didn't think much of it at the time and accepted the arrangement. When her mother came to collect the sofa, she handed me $100 in cash as an initial payment, promising the remainder the following week. However, when the time came, not only did she fail to pay, but she also complained that the sofa had collapsed and demanded that I inspect it. I refused, stating the sofa was in good condition when she took it, and if she was unsatisfied, I would take it back and sell it to someone else. This led to a heated exchange where she barred me from her house. My girlfriend sided with her mother, accusing me of being controlling and unnecessarily involving herself in a family dispute. Later, when I realized the cash was missing from the drawer, I searched the entire house to no avail. Everything else was unpacked, even trivial items like a blown light bulb. When I confronted Jenna about the missing money, she defensively claimed it was somewhere, echoing the vague excuses she had given before. It struck me then, the cash gift was composed of $10 notes, the same denomination as the partial payment for the sofa. I suspected that Jenna had stolen the money to facilitate her mother's partial payment to me, effectively making me pay myself, minus the stolen amount. When confronted, Jenna coldly admitted she might have taken it but dismissed the importance of my feelings or our relationship, stating she didn't care about me anymore. This revelation coincided suspiciously with her recent attempt to take out a new loan, likely around the same time she took the cash. Her actions and her threats to tarnish my reputation to others as retaliation further underscored her manipulative behavior. Despite the absence of concrete proof beyond her reaction, her demeanor provided all the confirmation I needed of her guilt. Moving forward, I've decided to arrange a DNA test once our child is born to ensure clarity on paternity. This step is crucial, not out of distrust of her fidelity, but to establish a factual basis for any future decisions regarding our child's upbringing. Final update. When my son was born last week, it was a pivotal moment that I hoped would herald a fresh start for us as a family. I had arranged for a DNA test, driven by the complex weave of trust issues that had plagued our relationship. When the results confirmed that he was indeed my biological son, a profound sense of relief washed over me. Witnessing the birth of my child and seeing Jenna endure the pain of labor filled me with compassion and reignited feelings of tenderness towards her. In those moments, surrounded by the stark walls of the hospital delivery room, I found myself wanting to believe that we could still salvage our relationship. I thought, perhaps naively, that the birth of our son could be a new beginning, a reason for Jenna to change her destructive habits. Moved by these emotions, I decided to give Jenna another chance, telling myself that love could still overcome the hurdles we faced. After all, aside from the financial deceptions, our love for each other had been genuine and deep. In a bid to support her during her recovery, and to help with the expenses that come with a newborn, I handed her a substantial sum of money to cover the hospital bills and to buy essentials for our son. My family, too, rallied around us, offering their support both emotionally and financially. They visited the hospital, bearing gifts and donations to ensure Jenna and our newborn had everything they needed. However, within a week of our son's birth, it became painfully clear that Jenna's old habits were deeply ingrained. Despite the new life we had just welcomed into the world, Jenna slipped back into her old ways. I discovered that the money meant for hospital bills and our son's needs had vanished. After some digging, I learned the bitter truth. Jenna had spent it all at the casinos. Just a week into motherhood, and she was already back to gambling. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust, the safety of our child, and the responsibilities that come with being parents. Jenna's actions showed a reckless disregard for our son's well-being and a continuation of the selfish behavior that had marked so much of our time together. I felt betrayed on a level I hadn't known before, and anger and hatred began to replace the feelings of sympathy and hope I had felt at the hospital. The conclusion I've come to is a painful but clear one. Jenna is unlikely to change. Her actions have consistently shown a pattern of taking advantage of situations and people, including those closest to her. It was a decisive moment for me. I could no longer allow my son to grow up in an environment where his mother's destructive habits could affect his life so detrimentally. The love I had for Jenna, which had once seemed unshakable, crumbled under the weight of her continued deceit and irresponsibility. I made the difficult decision to separate myself and my son from Jenna. Filing for sole custody was the next logical step. I consulted with a lawyer to understand my options and to ensure that my son would be protected from potential harm. The legal battle that lay ahead would no doubt be challenging, but I was determined to provide a stable and secure environment for my son, one free of the chaos and instability that Jenna brought into our lives. In parallel with these actions, I started arranging for more structured support systems. I reached out to family and friends, explaining the situation and garnering their support for what was to come. Their responses were a mix of dismay and determination to help us get through this. I also began attending counseling, to deal with the resentment and betrayal I felt, ensuring that these emotions wouldn't taint the relationship I wanted to build with my son. As I reflect on our relationship and its tumultuous end, I realize how deeply Jenna's actions have scarred me. Yet this ordeal has also clarified what truly matters. My focus now is entirely on my son, his happiness, his future, and his well-being. The journey ahead will be filled with challenges, but also with the joy of watching my son grow, unhindered by the shadows of a troubled relationship. The love I had for Jenna might never fully disappear, but the need to protect my son from her harmful behaviors supersedes all else. As I move forward, my resolve is strengthened by the knowledge that I am doing what is best for my child. The path I've chosen is not just for my own peace but for the upbringing of a child away from the instability and destructiveness of a gambler's life. My son deserves a chance at a better life, and I am committed to making that a reality. Reflecting on the relationship, I recognize the profound impact it had on my life. It was a stark lesson in the complexities of love and trust, and the painful realities of betrayal. I had gone into the relationship with hope and love, which were met with deception and heartache. Yet these experiences shaped my understanding of what I value in relationships and what I must guard against.